Black Ops, a name that has resonated with gamers since 2010. As crazy as it sounds, it's been 14 years of Black Ops that in that time has introduced some of the most iconic characters in the FPS space, and perhaps, depending on who you ask, maybe even gaming history. Since 2010, the Black Ops franchise has seen 5 installments, 6 if you count the Universal connections with World at War, with another one on the way in just a few weeks here. Since the launch of the original Black Ops, we've seen a tremendous number of changes, upgrades, and innovations to the franchise. So today, I want to run down the complete evolution of Black Ops. As we go along, drop your thoughts. What moments in Black Ops history were your favorite, or is there any one memory of playing that stands out to you? Let me know, and make sure to drop a like if you enjoyed the video, as well as make sure to subscribe to stay up to date with all things Black Ops and other FPS content. We're on the road to 600,000 subscribers, so I'd love to have you in the community if you'd like to join us. For now, sit back, relax, and let's take a look at the complete evolution of Black Ops. Black Ops, the first, well, actually not. Hang on just a second. Let's go back a little bit. While Black Ops isn't in the title of the game, the universe and lore of Black Ops was rooted in the events of Call of Duty World at War, laying the foundations for the Black Ops franchise for 16 years and counting. Had it not been for Infinity Ward's shift to a modern setting, World at War may not have been the last World War II title in the franchise in the late 2000s, early 2010s, but instead our last outing in the World War era until 2017 introduced us to a many number of things: a gripping campaign and narrative, an updated Treyarch multiplayer, and a surprising smash hit in the then Nazi Zombies game mode. The campaign introduced us to Private Miller, Petrenko, Sullivan, Roebuck, and more, but most notably, and the one we didn't know we'd see for years to come, a Viktor Reznov. Multiplayer was a classic, introducing some new things to the Treyarch version of multiplayer, but not entirely all brand new things, like the 357 kill streaks. Those were a first for a Treyarch multiplayer, but we'd seen that in the year prior with COD 4. While some things were just new to Treyarch titles, we of course saw plenty of classic maps and weapons we'd end up seeing remastered for years to come across various following titles. Maps like Castle, Cliffside, Asylum, Dome, and more. Weapons of the MP40 with stopping power for those who know, the PPSH, PTRS, STG-44, and others. The combination made for great fun and great memories for those that played it. And finally, zombies. Initially an Easter egg for completing the World at War campaign, then turned staple on the game's menu for everyone, the entire concept of seeing how long you could survive almost never left the Treyarch offices, believe it or not, with plenty of stories reported about how it was a for-fun mode built up among the team, with everyone internally trying to get those highest scores. Little did they know that that map of Noctra und Toten and that initial intro of the zombie running at you from across the airfield, that would kickstart a staple nearly as synonymous with the name Treyarch as the Black Ops IP itself. So, okay, just to lay the foundations of the Black Ops universe, let's now roll forward a bit again. Black Ops was surprisingly the first Call of Duty game to be the only project the team worked on. In World at War, the Treyarch team was actually split on both World at War as well as the Quantum of Solace video game to accompany the motion picture Bond film. Running on an enhanced IW 3.0 engine, directly upgraded from the World at War base, the improvements allowed for a bigger scope of the game. With all hands on deck, the fact that they made one of the most memorable games of the 2000s should be no surprise. Campaign set the stage for what would be many narratives derived from playing with your mind, perfectly encapsulating Vietnam War era, black operations, and this feeling that not everything may be exactly what it seems. Mason, Woods, Hudson, Bowman, Weaver, Kravchenko, Steiner, oh, and of course, that soon-to-be common thread of Reznov, the cast is as classic as a cast can be, rivaled only, depending on who you ask, by the cast of the original Modern Warfare trilogy, a real preference-based set of fan favorites. But some liked Treyarch games, some liked Infinity Ward games. Black Ops saw you all the way through the Bay of Pigs to navigating the application of MKUltra and the mind control sleeper agent wave to stop a global attack poised to make the Nova 6 gas the deadliest weapon on the planet. From the incredible twists along the way, the flashbacks to World at War's newly established importance in the universe, to the basic details that were shared across multiplayer and zombies, like the ability to get up in the main menu, walk around, and use the console. Oh, and speaking of which, the sheer depth of that console was incredibly impressive as something that was just supposed to be used for super in-depth lore and Easter eggs. Things like the Maverick code, allowing players to decode the coded messages at the beginning of each level to give a message saying that Reznov is dead, or is he dead? There was no body. Is he who he says he is? And things like the Ascension numbers code, heard all through the intro, missions, and more. I mean, the depth of secrets in the game was incredibly impressive, striking home to attention to detail and era-specific set pieces for the Cold War. Multiplayer built upon what we had seen in the last Treyarch title, as well as the prior year's latest installments into the Modern Warfare series, being Modern Warfare 2, where things got a bit more in depth than the simple create a class, load in, shoot, kill, 3-5-7 streaks, and repeat. Treyarch introduced plenty of new features into the multiplayer experience of Black Ops. One major introduction was the introduction of COD points, and no, not the same ones we see today as a digital currency in place of real money. Instead, while still a digital currency, it was exclusive to the Black Ops title and was the way to circumnavigate the traditional unlocking experience. This currency was earned by leveling up and completing contracts, a new set of challenges that allowed players to basically bet on yourself. This currency would be seen as a way to unlock items like weapons, camos, attachments, perks, reticles, emblems, emblem layers, backgrounds, kill streaks, and more. This new currency dictated your unlock progression and put you, the player, in more control of your own destiny per se. The other major purpose of COD points included wager matches, a way to compete and earn more COD points by simply placing in the money on various types of matches. Players could wager their designated amounts and jump into matches of gun game, sticks and stones, one in the chamber, or sharpshooter to try and earn back their currency while also taking from their opponents. While a really cool and innovative feature, there's never really been any official confirmation ever, but it's believed anti-gambling laws and rulings were the inevitable reason as to why this feature never returned. But not to stick too long on one aspect, player cards, feeder mode, and a higher than 10 prestige system were the first of the modern era of Call of Duty. Contracts, as mentioned, were challenges that allowed players to earn XP and COD points upon payout. Combat training was a new mode that allowed players to fight against AI opponents, intended for newer players to try out the multiplayer with difficulties of recruit, regular, hardened, and veteran. In addition to new items, plenty returned that were becoming staples of the COD franchise. An incredibly in-depth combat record, perhaps still the best we've seen in any COD game, returned, upgraded and pack-a-punched over the versions we had seen up until that point. Customizable kill streaks, first seen the year before, were introduced into Treyarch titles where players could end up getting classics like a spy plane, RCXD for the first time, the SR-71 Blackbird, a Huey, attack dogs, a Hind gunship, and more. The Hind gunship being the first of its kind to be fully maneuverable, player-controlled. The Create a Class system returned, but with plenty more features like custom reticles, more weapon camos, the ability to engrave clan tags and emblems onto weapons, and huge at the time was the ability to see your player's appearance simply in the Create a Class menu, along with a build of your weapons that you were crafting at that time. Maps like Firing Range, Jungle, Nuketown, Summit, Havana, Launch, and more became instant classics, receiving plenty of remasters over the years, with some like Nuketown even becoming staples seen in most, or in the case of Nuketown specifically, every single Black Ops game to date. Classic weapons we'd all remember fondly included things like the FAMAS, Galil, AK-47, Commando, MP5K, AK-74U, MPL, SPAS-12, HK-21, RPK, L96A1, Ballistic Knife, and I mean, do I need to go on? There were so many standouts that were absolutely amazing, but a weapon set that was basically any weapon could get the job done at this point, which is a refreshing thought looking back, but also something we probably didn't ever expect to change. Multiplayer was a breath of fresh air, but also was continuing to expand the reaches of what Call of Duty could do, and thankfully, while in its prime, as Black Ops for a decade to come would be the highest selling Call of Duty title of the franchise, crossing the 30 million copy threshold for the first time, which would then set up Modern Warfare 3 the following year to do the same, and Black Ops 2 the year after to just hit under the 30 million mark. Zombies was coming off a roaring surprise success. Remember how we said that mode almost never made it to ship? Well, this was the first year that they were doubling down on the mode, a full-fledged third pillar of the game, similar to what Modern Warfare 2 had introduced in the way of Spec Ops the year before, but not so much completable missions as it was round-based survival mixed with a growing universal lore and Easter eggs. Launching with Keener der Toten, a map that would instantly become a classic, and finishing with Moon, the whole experience was a delight, introducing us to a number of different things. Things like the Thunder Gun, Winter's Howl, VR-11, 3179 JGB-215, otherwise known as the Baby Maker, the Wave Gun, Scavenger, Lunar Lander, Zipline Systems, Minecarts, Water Slides, Low Gravity, Launch Pads, Gersh Device, Matryoshka Dolls, Stamina Up, and PhD Flopper, along with Deadshot Daiquiri and Mule Kick, and much more. When you look at the offerings of the maps in the game, Kino 5, which was for a time hidden until you actually completed the campaign, similar to the original Nocturne and Toten unlock criteria, or if you unlocked it via the console, coming back to that again. Ascension, Call of the Dead, Shangri-La, and Moon, all instantly recognizable classics. This outing not only included some incredible set pieces, but also our first real foray into the depth of the zombie storyline, unfolding with each and every map's Easter egg. If you couldn't get enough of the zombies experience, Black Ops also introduced Dead Ops Arcade for the first time, a top-down shooter similar to what you'd see in a, as the name suggests, arcade machine, which was hidden from players until they input the 3-arc unlock command in the consoles at the main menu. Again, super sneaky, but super cool of the team to add so many things, both hidden and in plain view. The original Black Ops was a certifiable classic. Rounding out the tail end of what many would consider the golden age of Call of Duty, Black Ops 2 follows up the wildly successful Black Ops in story, universal connections, and the ability to play with your mind. Following the next generation of Black Ops, our main present-day narrative, though that's set in the year 2025, follows David Mason and Mike Harper, but the storyline doesn't just follow the younger Mason. The narrative is split between that dubbed present day in the near future and the years of 1986 and 1989, shortly after the events of Cold War that would come nearly a decade later and 18 years after the events of Black Ops 1. We're introduced to the younger Mason, but reintroduced to old friends like Alex Mason, Frank Woods, Jason Hudson, and then introduced to one Raul Menendez, our bad guy who is simply iconic. Perhaps what was most innovative about the Black Ops 2 campaign wasn't the time jumping or the continued mind games, but instead the open-ended nature of the game's campaign. For the first time in Call of Duty, the player's choices directly impacted the outcome of certain things, including the game itself. From more minor decisions, like the ability to either avoid fire or walk through it, which would then either burn or not burn Harper's face for the remainder of the game, to choosing multiple characters to live or die, Black Ops 2 featured plenty of character choices that had a real impact on the outcome of the narrative, including optional missions that you could either avoid entirely or you could get a minor different outcome for various portions of the game. With 8 possible endings, some more major than others, it's a massive deviation from what COD campaigns had previously delivered and offered a large sense of player engagement as you ultimately dictated what would happen and how the game would end. Such a cool feature that I'm glad we got to see again in Black Ops Cold War and perhaps may see again with Black Ops 6, but for the time being, that's not yet known. Either way, an incredible campaign and innovation to the franchise. Multiplayer, like Black Ops before it, introduced plenty of things that were brand new to the franchise while also bringing back a ton of fan favorite things, and now core tenets of what the COD franchise had become. New introductions including things like score streaks rather than kill streaks, allowing for the first time in the franchise the objective players to be rewarded. While of course you got score for kills, it also heavily encouraged that objective and team play so that you could get your streaks and decimate your enemies, because at this point, streaks were still incredibly powerful. Black Ops 2's multiplayer also introduced the Pick 10 system, a feature that many would call the pinnacle of the creative class systems in the franchise, where players were given 10 air quote points to do with however you pleased. Wanted to max out your attachments and not take a lethal or tactical? You could do that. Wanted to take 6 perks instead of just 3? You could do that. Wanted to evenly balance everything across the board in your loadout? You could. The new system allowed for deeper customization into the playing experience that I think was very well intentioned and well executed. This, by extension, also was the first time players saw the introduction of wildcards, a mandatory point that would be needed to break the sort of conventional rules of the creative class that we knew up until that point. Gunfighter allowing for more attachments, Perk Greed allowing for more than 3 perks, and then things like Prestige Master were introduced for the first time, where it was a max level cap that players could hit, where initially speaking, players had to also achieve that Prestige 20 level 80 in Modern Warfare 3 the year prior, but that was quickly fixed and was no longer a prerequisite. Interesting little fun fact there that was also something that had to be achieved to be a Prestige Master in those first days of Black Ops 2. League play was also a franchise first, introducing players to an integrated competitive system, utilizing competitive maps, modes, and rule sets with global rankings available for all players to grind. You didn't have to go to a third-party site, set up private matches or anything like that, or be a professional player. You could just simply jump in and grind out the competitive. Masters Rank 1 was always that goal, and for the grinders out there, you may have achieved it. Besides that, you had some incredible gameplay experiences in the way of maps, modes, and weapons. Maps like Hijacked, Plaza, Raid, Slums, Standoff, and Nuketown 2025 were all classics with, again, plenty having been remade since their introduction for the first time. Frankly, even some of the DLC maps to come out of Black Ops 2 were legendary, and the ones that I still think stand the test of time include Cove, Grind, and a few others that were just phenomenal. You had incredible score streaks to go for that just decimated enemies. The Stealth Chopper, Orbital VSAT, Lodestar, K9 Unit, Swarm. Man, do I miss all those. The Orbital VSAT, K9, and Swarm they were a pub stomper's delight, and my goodness were they powerful. Weapons like the MSMC, to this day my personal favorite weapon in COD history, despite predominantly being a rifle guy. The M8A7, another incredible classic, MTAR, AN94, MP7, PDW, Scorpion, Peacekeeper, LSAT, Ballista, DSR. There were so many good ones, man. My bias might be showing, but man, were those some fun times. Zombies looked to build even more on top of what a stellar Black Ops year delivered, but admittedly kind of fell short in the initial launch window. With ambitions kind of too large for the hardware at the time, Transit, or Green Run, was a large zombies world, comprised of multiple smaller maps that you could individually play that, again, at the time didn't quite hit the mark, but has since become a beloved staple of the title, happily bringing back a lot of fond memories instead of the frustrations around launch that had been introduced that maybe back then you didn't see past. Aside from that, the game saw an additional map at launch, though initially only for the hardened and care package editions of the game, along with those that had the season pass for Black Ops 2. Nuketown Zombies, turning that beloved map into a zombies hellscape, kitted with things like a random perk machine drop, which added to the chaos. Thematically, this took place at the same time as Moon, thus interconnecting the Black Ops 1 and Black Ops 2 storylines directly if the switch to the new crew in Transit was a bit worrisome for players. As the year progressed, we saw introductions of maps like Die Rise, Mob of the Dead, a personal favorite of mine, Buried, and Origins. Each of these introduced some iconic locations in Zombies history, and all following the new crew of Russman, Misty, Marlton, and Stolinger. The final map of Origins is when we're reintroduced in a playable sense to our friends in the original crew for, and again, bias probably showing, incredible cap to the year of content in the Origins map, as well as the story ending. In addition to the great maps, we saw a bunch of things like the introduction of the Trample Steam, Hell's Retriever, Golden Spork, the Afterlife mechanic, the Time Bomb, new staffs, new wonder weapons like the Paralyzer and Ray Gun Mark II, new perks like Who's Who, Vulture Raid, and Electric Cherry, and the introduction of the Der Wonder Fizz machine, which allowed players to get a random perk for the cost of 1,500 points. Could be a steal, but you never knew what you were going to end up getting. What's also cool was the introduction of the new modes Grief and Turned in Black Ops 2, modes that allowed for a deviation from the air-quote traditional zombies formula for the first time. In Grief, two teams were pitted against each other where you could directly sabotage another team's progress. You don't want to open a door? Don't. Want to run a train of zombies through a player's path and aggro them to the other player? Well, you can do that too. Do whatever you could to be the last team standing. Turned was exactly as it sounds. You had players starting as zombies and then they had to find the cure, and players with the most points at the end would eventually win. So for zombies, for the first time, you had deviations and some fun ones at that. Ultimately, the Black Ops 2 package had a little bit of everything for everyone. Campaign fans got a first of its kind in the franchise experience. Multiplayer fans had an absolutely classic multiplayer experience with some of the franchise's best maps, modes, and weapons, while Zombies innovated on itself even further, delivering the Easter eggs and story that you'd come to expect while giving us new ways to play from day one onwards. Black Ops 3's launch was marketed as a continuation of the advanced movement era, but more importantly, come narrative as a way for the Black Ops mind games to continue. Studio head Mark Lamia had gone ahead for months saying this game was going to mess with you, and for better or for worse, it did. The game's entire campaign was not one of the best critically acclaimed campaigns we had seen, but I personally think it was largely because there was just too much of a stress on trying to mess with the player's perception of reality. The game, for many, just didn't make sense, but if you were to recenter your focus, perhaps it would make more sense. Without going too far into the depths of the lore and story retelling, the first missions are actually the only missions that actually take place. If you remember, your character ends up having all 4 limbs ripped off by grunts on a mission. Then they're taken to have a surgery to implement cybernetic augmentations, but despite what the campaign allows us to believe by playing the next dozen or so missions, the player dies due to complications of that surgery. Surprisingly, the end is laid out at the very beginning and partially in plain view. If you were to read the super fast scrolling pre-mission text, it describes the operations as a report where this laid out what was really happening. Another interesting Easter egg was that if you took the protocols in mission order, the first letters would spell out ORWEARETAYL, or when reordered according to the corresponding mission's chronological order in the story, We Are Taylor, which refers to the ending of the game that we see. That part, though written out for us, is still a little ambiguous, as it's not definitively known if it's meant to be a reference to both the player and Taylor, or if it's referencing a theory that alleges the player and Taylor's minds were fused after the DNI was purged in the campaign. But aside from the story itself, Black Ops 3 introduced a few new things in the campaign experience. Firstly, a safe house, where for the first time a player could go and do a lot more customization and game planning for the campaign. Players could create loadouts similar to the create a class in the armory. There were collectibles that you could find throughout the campaign. There was a wardrobe that allowed players to change their helmet, uniform, and character face, a data vault similar to the console from Black Ops, among other things, and there was an introduction of a realistic difficulty, which was a one-shot and you're dead, a higher level than veteran mode. Additionally, for the first time, players also had a leveling system to progress through, upwards of level 20 in the campaign, offering unique rewards as you went along, as well as that standalone ranking to show off. The campaign attempted to push the boundaries, but perhaps pushed a little too far for its own good in some scenarios. It also didn't help that the franchise, which was built upon the universal lore of heroes we had come to know and love in the Masons, Woods, Hudsons, and more, were not included in this game at all. The only real ties to prior Black Ops games at the time was the reference of Menendez once, and a few storyline references in one sequence in-game with Nova 6 Gas. Besides that, it was loosely in the same universe, like canonically it's there, but it just didn't really have a ton to get people invested and connected in the same fashion the prior games had. Multiplayer, however, was a different story. Multiplayer for Black Ops 3 is regarded as some of the best multiplayer depending on who you ask. Whether you liked it or not, advanced movement was the new thing in Call of Duty at the time, and while it seemed like it would lasted forever, it's actually kind of surprising to consider that it only lasted 3 years for how long those 3 years did feel. But personally speaking, I felt Black Ops 3 refined a bit of that advanced movement first seen in Advanced Warfare, with arguably Infinite Warfare even refining Black Ops 3's even further, but different story for a different day. Instead of a harsh and abrupt dash that you'd see in that exo movement of Advanced Warfare, thrusters allowed for a bit more smoothing in the player's pathing and control, not immediately darting you one way or the other, but also allowing you to control the extent of how far you wanted to go in any given direction. In addition to more player choice, players could wall run along with boost slides and more, making movement rather fluid and rather quick. Another first for the Black Ops franchise and Call of Duty as a whole at that point was the introduction of the Specialist system, a first introduction into the hero-based element of the franchise. There were 9 playable Specialists on launch, with a 10th introduced in the way of Blackjack, and only on current gen at the time, which was PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Each Specialist had an Ultra and 2 abilities that you could choose one of in-game, each offering a unique style to play the game with. One additional thing that players may or may not have noticed, in keeping with the theme of messing with the player's mind, Black Ops 3 actually introduced another narrative for players to potentially follow, this being the Specialist story, a seemingly new but continued storyline of the campaign that was loosely based around those events, as in, it doesn't appear to have direct ties to the canon storyline told, but it does play into the universe architecture of what was told. Each Specialist, as you rank them up, offered more and more intel on their Specialist cards, audio files, and hints that would then tell you a bit more about the character in which you are going to battle with. Well, if you unlocked enough of them, pieces of a story started to form. Long story short, the entirety of the Black Ops 3 multiplayer experience was a military simulation program that was being sold to the highest bidder. The Specialist's consciousness was uploaded to this program where they could fight, die, and repeat. While it was hinted at in these audio files, it was more explicitly detailed in a Black Ops 4 comic in partnership with Dark Horse that Call of Duty ended up publishing. Specifically in the issue explaining Torque's backstory, we see him getting out of a simulator, stating that he knows it's a simulation, but the pain feels so real. This, based upon the timeline of events, Black Ops 4 was a prequel to Black Ops 3. It's likely the initial testing of that program that would lead into this Black Ops 3 story. Key players were an unspecified mole, a buyer, but neither really were ever expanded upon. Honestly, it was a really cool addition that was never elaborated further, since we've never gone further out into the future beyond Black Ops 3's timeline when we look at the Black Ops universal lore. Another first for the multiplayer was the reorganization of the Prestige system, for the first time introducing players to a Prestige Master and then some. After players reached the max level of 10th Prestige, they could end up ranking all the way up to level 1000 if they so chose to do so. Well, really at that point it'd be automatic and there's no turning back, but you get the point. You could choose to continue to go on for another 1000 levels if you wanted. You had even more to rank up through beyond that standard progression track introduced with all the prior titles since COD 4. Black Ops 3 also introduced Gunsmith, not quite the way that we think of Gunsmith in recent years since Modern Warfare 2019, but instead in a sense of being able to create and design cosmetics of pre-existing weapons, kind of like cosmetic variants of blueprints, being able to save those weapon builds with paint jobs on them, a feature also introduced with Black Ops 3 for the Black Ops franchise. Custom camos that were essentially what you could make for yourself. The black market was an unfortunate introduction which pushed the then annoying supply drop system to the edge with monetization of the supply drop system. Players had the ability to earn drops, but the invisible hand was basically always pushing players to try and purchase for better odds, especially with the loot pool all being one singular pool, diluted with items that nobody would care about. But then you'd have new functional weapons included in there that you'd have like a 1 in 3,000 plus chance to pull what exactly you wanted. While functionally speaking, the multiplayer introduced quite a few things that were great, and also things like the supply drop system takeover that wasn't so great, the fundamentals of the game that made up Black Ops 3 were still solid. They were still great. Maps, modes, weapons, at this point, it should be a given that they're going to be awesome in a Treyarch game, right? While maybe not as many standouts exist in some of the categories of the air quote golden age of Call of Duty, maps like Combine, Fringe, Hunted, Redwood, Nuketown, and others were great. Some of the DLC maps were rather interesting as well, introducing maps like Skyjacked and Empire, remakes of classic maps from Black Ops 2, but also things like Micro, a hilarious setting of a picnic table from the perspective of, let's say, ants as soldiers. Surprisingly, there was also even a parkour course in the way of free run. Weapons, there were plenty. The KN-44, Man-O-War, M8A7, ICR, Kuda, Razorback, Dingo, Locust, and more. There were plenty of things that were great from day one. Another massive introduction, speaking of weapons, one that's become a staple even to today, was the introduction of Dark Matter, a new mastery camo that required players to earn all camos for every single gun, mastering everything your arsenal had to throw at you. At the time, it felt incredibly cool to go for and unlock, but I don't think that we'd have any idea that this would have been setting the stage for camo grinding for years to come. Zombies had quite a year, quite a lot of offering, and quite a lot of new features. From the start, it was announced that Zombies would have a campaign, which excited players to no end. Following the storyline from Easter eggs and one update per few months was something that strung players along, and they loved the idea of having all of that maybe up front. However, the Zombies campaign, called Nightmares as it became known, wasn't exactly as players anticipated. Instead, it was a zombified version of the existing campaign, instead replacing AI enemies with zombies, but you still kind of went through the entire campaign, just slightly different. So this was unlocked by default on the current version by playing the campaign through, or again, coming back to the reintroduction of the console, the data vault in the safe house. If you input the code Dreamland into the data vault, you'd unlock it there. So an interesting addition, but may have been a swing and a miss for a lot of players. Traditional Zombies had a kickoff to a stellar campaign in Black Ops though. Just like campaign and like the multiplayer, there was its own separate progression track that players could go through, allowing you to customize weapons and prestige, introduce players to the grind of 10 prestiges through 35 levels, and again, upwards of level 1000, a first carried over from Black Ops 3's multiplayer, but uniquely outfitted for zombies as well. Maps like Shadows of Evil, The Giant, Der Eisendrache, Zetsubou no Shima, Gorod Krovi, and Revelations dawned the initial year of support for the Zombies outing. Some became cult classics, like I distinctly remember Gorod Krovi being ripped apart near its launch, but it's got a loyal fan base showing love for that map even to today. Others like Der Eisendrache were killer from the start. Shadows as well, loyal fan base, initially wasn't received as zombies enough, but it grew on a lot of people, and personally speaking, I know I might be in a minority here, but I personally loved Revelations. Narratively, it may not have been people's favorites, but I'm a big color theory nerd, so just like the skybox as soon as you spawn in is beautiful, so great. Gobblegums were also introduced in Black Ops 3, introducing a new way to get power-ups and abilities based on earned items and things that you could pop after randomly earning them in-game. This was also presented in a manner similar to supply drops with Dr. Monty's Factory, where you could earn up to 3 Gobblegums at a time after trading in vials of liquid divinium, a zombies currency earned by spending points in a match of zombies, completing challenges, or purchasing them with COD points in exchange for real currency. Also introduced in Black Ops 3, though not as strictly in-game earned currency like Black Ops. Now it's like a genuine trade-off of real currency. But notice how we mentioned that was the initial year of support. Why would I say that? Well, up until this point, no Call of Duty had ever gotten content drops en masse after the next title had launched, right? Well, yes. While some games dropped bits and pieces here, like Advanced Warfare dropped a few weapons post-launch of Black Ops 3, but Black Ops 3 got a whole DLC pack during the life of Infinite Warfare. That was Zombies Chronicles, a collection of remastered maps with modernized twists on lore, gameplay items, and of course, much needed facelifts graphically. Naturally, this soared to become the most sold PlayStation expansion at the time, and that lasted for years. Chronicles included Nocturne Toten, Verrückt, Shinonuma, Kino der Toten, Ascension, Shangri-La, Moon, and Origins, an absolutely incredible roster of maps in a time where players were dying for a sense of normalcy amidst, at the time, the third year of advanced movement and a space setting with Infinite Warfare. I don't think that it's any hot take to say that Zombies Chronicles was one of the best things to come out of Black Ops 3, perhaps any Black Ops game to date. Interestingly, the whole package was a massive offering for fans the entire year, but it also was the year that we had a transitional period for console generations, as it would be the final game offered on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. The generational divide was ever so apparent since the launch of Ghost when it was supported 2 generations, but in Black Ops 3, it was undeniable. Due to the hardware limitations, there was no campaign. The multiplayer did not have a beta like current generations. The paint shop wasn't available. The gunsmith wasn't available. Ground war wasn't available. The maximum frame rate for zombies was only 30 frames per second, and that even fluctuated between 30 and 60 FPS in multiplayer. Theater mode was not available. The emblem editor was not available. Split screen was not available. The black market and blackjack specialist, you guessed it, not available. Certain camos were not available, and only zombies maps up to DLC 1 and Der Eisendrache were available. It was clear this game was limited in tech, but if you were on last gen at the time, it was surprisingly still supported, but was it for the better? Either way, Black Ops 3 was a killer year. Black Ops 4 was a game that became hit or miss for many. Lots of players will tell you they loved it, others will tell you they hated it, but with how much new it introduced, it also stuck to the mold of prior titles in other ways. However, one of the biggest deviations that you'd see with the game was, for the first time in COD history, there was no campaign. It's reported that internally the campaign was a mess, and that it would have made the lukewarm reception of Black Ops 3's campaign look incredible by comparison. So, for either timing purposes and the inability to get the game's story mode up and running by launch, or creative differences internally that it just wouldn't be up to par, the campaign was scrapped. There was a Specialist HQ which was meant to act as a stand-in for the campaign with a brief narrative that frankly got really weird and wild, that tied into the story that seemed to bleed into Blackout's Battle Royale as well, but it was strange. Like, buckle up, here's why. The story introduces us to Savannah and her niece Lucy visiting the grave of Jessica Mason Green, the granddaughter of Alex Mason. So immediately we have more ties than Black Ops 3 did to the original Black Ops storylines. Jessica was killed in action, or presumed so, on an op with battery and ruin that was ambushed. Savannah, also Mason, was a billionaire looking to piece together the op gone wrong and put together a team of specialists, all of who we'd see in Black Ops 4's multiplayer. Well, it's not exactly the case as it appears to be in that storyline. Turns out that team was specifically created for Project Blackout, a winner-take-all project bringing the best fighters in the world together as what they called archetypes, playing into the simulation story of Black Ops 3 as a precursor, but also in this weird and genuine resurrection type of way. Like, Frank Woods, seen in the intro of the Specialist HQ, seems like a simulation, but he's also in the narrative actually real, and also together with Savannah, who's his best friend's granddaughter. Like, a little weird out of the bat there when you take a look at some of those hidden plot points. Alex Mason is also a resurrected archetype, though in a spin that I don't know if it was ever fully explained. They made it seem like he was the one that was mentally out of it, that he was the one that was always in the box, not Woods, referencing the rescue in Vietnam. Then Raul Menendez was also a resurrected archetype who was running and funding Project Blackout through the black market, and who was also responsible for the ambush of the missions we previously mentioned, since Jessica Mason was in protest of Project Blackout and resurrecting these characters. By the end of all the details, this is revealed that Jessica is alive and that the specialists are now aware of Project Blackout and appear to be going on the offensive, but that's all that we're really told. Again, as with the Black Ops 3 multiplayer specialist stories, there was so much that definitely could have been expanded upon that honestly, I think we could have had a killer campaign, but we only saw hints of that as players had to piece it together on their own if they were curious. But Black Ops 4's multiplayer was a continuation in some regards to the Black Ops 3 multiplayer, minus the advanced movement and wall running. The specialists were still there, though depending on who you ask, in a way that was a bit more annoying, as they were granted both abilities that we had seen from Black Ops 3 and an ultimate, rather than having to choose between one of the two abilities and an ultimate. So 3 items to work with rather than 2 for each player. For the first time, manual healing was also introduced into the multiplayer experience, but as the default way for how you'd get your health back, allowing for immediate health regeneration if you wanted, but also on a cooldown and slightly quicker cooldown with the right equipment. It was a change that took some getting used to, but ultimately when done, had players spamming their left bumpers well into the year of Modern Warfare 2019 if I were to guess. I know that I was doing that. Black Ops 4 was also the first title to introduce players to the Battle Pass system as a way of earning content, new weapons, cosmetics, and more, which initially took a long time. Initially, there were 200 tiers as the first Battle Pass, but that proved to be too long and then was shortened to 100, with reserve cases to follow in follow-up seasons. Those reserves were in practice supply drops, but initially speaking, they were only available through playtime and reaching beyond tier 100 of the Battle Pass. That is until Operation Grand Heist. That's when, without any prior marketing, the black market introduced reserves and the return of paid supply drops, also then funneling content heavily into those supply drops. This made Black Ops 4 appear to fix the supply drop issue, but then went right back to it like Black Ops 3 had. It was an incredibly frustrating time, but it's nice to know that we're out of that now, I'd say. Weaponry and maps, there were a few standouts. I don't know that I'd say there were any of them as iconic as the first 3 Black Ops titles, but weapons like the Rampart, Maddox, KN-57, Spitfire, SOG 9mm, Paladin, Koshka, all great options. One cool thing that was introduced with weaponry was the introduction of operator mods. These were attachments that functionally changed a bit of how your weapon would behave, kind of like the precursor to this year's Modern Warfare 3's aftermarket parts, but not as fleshed out as aftermarket parts per se. Things like the crossbar for the Hades allowed for the LMG to be a hip-fire machine, similar to the chainsaw from Ghost. The Wildfire mod allowed the Spitfire to increase its already insane rate of fire to be almost comically fast-firing. The Impact Blast mod allowed for the S6 Stingray to shoot explosive rounds, and well, you get the picture. It was a cool new feature to diversify the way weapons performed in some capacity. Zombies, on the other side of the coin for staples of the Black Ops franchise, was poised to have its largest year ever, or so it seemed at launch. With the game's launch, there was not 1, not 2, not even 3, but 4 maps that were playable on day 1. 9, Voyage of Despair, Blood of the Dead, and a bonus map for those who had the Black Ops Pass, but could also be later purchased for $8 later in the year as a standalone map, that being Classified, a remake of 5 from Black Ops 1. The maps followed 2 paths, one following the original story that was in place since World at War, and another following a new crew for what was called the Chaos story. The reception on launch was excitement mixed with a bit of confusion, not knowing what to play first, turned more genuine confusion as Easter eggs were completed. Where did this all fall chronologically? How do they piece together and more were all asked. The dual storylines were supported throughout the year as we had Dead of the Night and Ancient Evil as DLC maps that supported the Chaos story, and then Alpha Omega and Tag der Toten supporting and rounding out the classic storyline. A depressing fact of the year was that despite such a heavy-hitting, top-heavy launch, by the end of the year, it appeared that most of the funding for the game's zombie mode and the team was nearly gutted, with reports of the team being reduced drastically, and it appeared pretty evidently so, as things like cutscenes for Easter eggs just eventually turned into comic strip image presentations of what was happening, whereas previously, a good mark of the investment was motion captured cinematics or in-engine cinematics, and it was all basically stripped away at that point. Thankfully, that lack of support and feeling of despair within the zombies community wouldn't mean the end of the mode altogether. And then finally, with Black Ops 4, Blackout. Internally and in the game files known as, get this, Warzone was introduced within Black Ops 4, the first time that we'd see publicly a Battle Royale in Call of Duty. Though, fun fact, there was internal testing of a Battle Royale game type in World War II that never made it past prototyping, like very early prototyping, done on regular-sized multiplayer maps. I remember seeing leaks of that, and people were wondering why things like Gustav Cannon was associated with strings referencing BR. It was just early prototyping of a winner-take-all, one-life type mode, but Blackout was an interesting one. I remember hearing discussion about the mode and how it was a miracle they got it not only to be playable in a beta state ahead of the game's launch because we had a beta for that on its own, but also that it was completed to begin with. It was crafted in only 9 months as a direct result of a pivot away from a campaign. The game's dev time was much shorter than the allotted time for any other third mode, which is why upon its announcement, we saw just a cinematic that was conceptual rather than actual footage or anything like that. It was still well under development. Initially, it was reported the concept also would be much different than what we got. Instead of a sprawling world, it was reported we'd see a vertical style of Battle Royale focused around the main construction, high-rise POI, where players started at various levels and were eventually pushed up or down based on the gas's behavior that game. All vertical Battle Royale. Obviously, the sizing of the building would have been much bigger than just what we had in construction, but conceptually speaking, that was one of the ways it was reported that was going to go before they switched to a traditional Battle Royale. Obviously, we know that was changed and thus not what we got, but interesting to see that deviation of initial planning. Instead, we are introduced to this map called Eclipse, a map that would eventually evolve over the course of the seasons or operations to come in Black Ops 4. This map featured plenty of classic areas from Black Ops history like Nuketown, Firing Range, Asylum, Estates, Array, Cargo, and more that would have hints of or entire segments of prior multiplayer maps seen in the Black Ops franchise. This map was the first of its kind, a sprawling landscape that allowed for up to 100 players including land, sea, and air vehicles vehicles to traverse the world, and featured a traditional battle royale loot system, entirely random RNG. Things like loadouts were not a thing, and once you were dead, you were dead. There was no revive system, so you could be spectating your team for a while if you died early on in the match. Attachments and lootable timed perks were also something that were added to the gameplay loop. That was pretty interesting. While every weapon was random, you could also end up kitting your weapons out further to allow for a better chance in a gunfight. There were Easter eggs, character and operator rewards, and more as time progressed, with the introduction of even the paint can system in order to allow for players to unlock dark matter for weapons in Blackout, though that would take ages to collect and may not have been worth it to many players. Blackout also introduced a new way to play Battle Royale to a lot of players with Alcatraz, the second of the two maps included in the Blackout experience. This, however, launching in the spring following Black Ops 4's launch. This only supported 40 players, but what it lacked in player count, it made up for in respawns, adding to the chaos on a small map. This was one of the first times we'd see a Battle Royale introduce a respawn system of sorts, where players weren't necessarily down and out when dead, instead being able to come back so long as their teammates were alive. This became the precursor of the ever-so-loved Resurgence mode to come later in Warzone, but it all started here. Ultimately, it was an incredible offering that was a crazy new addition and deviation from what players perhaps were used to, but I firmly believe, personally speaking, that Blackout walked so that Warzone could run. I mean, internally, it was also being developed a Blackout 2, a sequel and follow-up that would have been a Black Ops-specific Battle Royale, and frankly, by all indications, it appeared that Infinity Ward's introduction of Warzone was also originally planned to be an annually tethered release, specific only to Modern Warfare 2019 and maybe any other Modern Warfare games beyond. But then it was decided it would be a free-to-play game and supported for a long time to come. So that, unfortunately, undercut the necessity of a Blackout 2, and thus we saw the world being developed turned into what would become Fireteam and Outbreak maps in Black Ops Cold War. But we'll get there in a second. It's interesting, though, to see that dichotomy of what Call of Duty Battle Royale was versus what it turned out to be. No doubt there's still plenty of people who enjoy this more than Warzone, but unfortunately, it appears that Blackout will be a one-off for the entirety of COD history, a moment we can look back on fondly, but likely won't ever see replicated. With 3 games set in the near to distant future, Black Ops Cold War was introduced in the fall of 2020 and went back in time. A first that we had seen narratively since the original Black Ops, and I guess you could also say in 2012 with Black Ops 2, thanks to that split narrative. But Black Ops Cold War was introduced as the first non-numbered Black Ops game. This likely due in part to the rumored turmoil surrounding the development of the game. Before Modern Warfare 2019 was officially revealed, I distinctly remember reading the report like 2 days before I flew to LA to hear about the game from Infinity Ward that it was reported that Treyarch, hot off their work with Black Ops 4, would be assuming the lead role of Call of Duty 2020, the year after Modern Warfare 2019, taking the reins from a shared Raven and Sledgehammer project. Sledgehammer's involvement would be incredibly limited, and they'd be put to the next project, something that would then send the next few years into a reactionary state of development, picking up slack here and there, lack of dev time, and more. But this title that Treyarch came into already appeared to be a Cold War story to begin with, told by Raven, with Treyarch mainly focusing on polishing and finishing the multiplayer and zombie side of the game. Raven, again, heading that narrative side. This is, while it's not confirmed, why I'd guess we didn't see the original castings for Mason and Woods to return, simply because the story was already going to exist as is before Treyarch came in, and then to brand it a Black Ops games for sales, characters like Woods, Mason, and Hudson were added into the development of the game. Short and last-second notice, essentially, which is why their involvement seems so minuscule in the grand scheme of the Cold War story. Either way, the campaign picked up between Black Ops and Black Ops 2's flashback periods, honing in on the Cold War and a new enemy of Perseus. We're introduced to Russell Adler, who I think is perhaps the first new and iconic character that we've seen introduced into the Call of Duty franchise in quite some time. Like, we always think of Mason, Woods, Price, Soap, Gaz, and all those, but they were introduced 15 plus years ago in some cases. Characters that had that staying power of the golden days of the franchise. Instead, Adler was a brand new character, but instantly recognizable as that cool badass that he was. This campaign introduced a lot of cool, new, and returning features. The Safe House returned, where you could actually walk around, interact with each of the characters in the game. You could take a look at the evidence board to take part in side missions, explore collectibles, and things that could help you out. There was even a few Easter eggs in there, like a locked area that required the code of 11/22/63, the date of the Kennedy assassination, also hailing back to that established theory that Mason could have been a shooter, but different story for a different day. They reintroduced the Dark Ops challenges, something I was a huge fan of, and frankly, spent more time in campaign to complete Dark Ops Mastery challenges than I did in the whole of multiplayer in the first few days of the game's launch cycle. Cold War also played on the interesting level of character customizations, being able to create your own persona out of the character Bell, which, if you didn't make any fun puns out of that, I feel like that was a missed opportunity for you. Formerly, my character's name was Taco Bell, but alas, this introduced things like skill sets that persisted throughout the campaign, but of a set large number, only a few could be chosen and there was no going back, so it introduced multiple ways that you'd be able to play the campaign in a way that the player saw best. Despite being developed and written by Raven, I feel like this campaign actually really captured the essence of Black Ops again after two dull outings for narratives that either were a bit too over the top for their own good or too nuanced in the way that it was presented. I mean, I bet tons of players didn't even know that there was a narrative behind Black Ops 4. But Black Ops Cold War felt like a spy thriller with twists and turns that kept you engaged. Not to mention, there's a bit of player choice introduced for the first time since Black Ops 2. It wasn't as in-depth as the choices versus outcomes of Black Ops 2, but there were a few choices the players had to make, like who to save of two choices, what dialogue you could give as a reply, and even multiple endings once again. I'm a huge fan of this, though the canon ending sees you save the day as a hero and then you're seemingly killed off on a cliffside by Adler. There are alternatives. You can double-cross your team of Adler, Mason, Woods, and whomever you save and set off the nukes while pinning the entire global apocalypse on the United States, while either ultimately dying as Bell by giving yourself up or triggering a Perseus ambush in which you could kill all the members of your prior team. Obviously, for continuity of the Black Ops universe, the good ending's the only one that is considered canon, but it's awesome to see once again that feeling of having your choices have weight behind them. I was a huge fan of that and loved the campaign. Black Ops Cold War's multiplayer was an interesting one. Following the success of Modern Warfare 2019, the differences were a bit jarring. No tactical sprint, a different engine, it felt different, and with Warzone's integration of Cold War items into Modern Warfare 2019, especially throughout that year, you could see that differentiation very clearly. The game's multiplayer and that developmental shift from a dual project with Sledgehammer and Raven to Treyarch was perhaps made clear as the game launched with the least amount of multiplayer maps we've ever seen to date. Only 8 multiplayer maps were available for 6v6 on launch. There were 2 additional maps in Alpine and Ruka, Fireteam-based maps that were larger scale, built again from that scrapped Blackout 2 world, and Nuketown came shortly after the launch of the game, but before Season 1, but it still wasn't something that there was a huge offering in terms of content. Initially, that turned some players off, though in all fairness, things did pick up post-launch in that year of support, which was rather solid for multiplayer and 6v6 support, but at launch again, it seemed to be a falter due to the shortened developmental window. Cold War also changed things like the streak system in multiplayer, returning to a score streak-based system as opposed to the kill streaks in Modern Warfare 2019, and did allow for score streak looping, as Modern Warfare 2019 did not, but in a weird manner. Once a streak was earned and called in, it was then sent on a cooldown period before any score could count towards this. So in theory, if you got a UAV and you only were running UAVs, you'd call it in, and while you'd previously have the ability to work towards another UAV and another streak at that point, you have to wait like 60 seconds before you could get any score that goes back to that next UAV. So even if you earned all that score in 60 seconds, it would still restart from 0 once that countdown finished. This streak system also allowed streak points to persist, meaning that if you died, your score would not reset, and that meant plenty of players got free streaks for doing next to nothing, which was pretty controversial at the time and wasn't favorably looked at. But as the year went on, things like more streaks were introduced, a first for the franchise, DLC score streaks. There were a variety of game modes introduced as the year went along, and a solid number of weapons from day one to when the game concluded, like the XM4, Farah, C58, Vargo 52, MP5, Milano, MAC-10, OTS-9, LW3 Tundra, Swiss K31, and more that became fan favorites at the time that ultimately contributed to what I'd say was a good multiplayer experience. It may not have been as highly regarded as the classic Black Ops games, especially with the introduction of the current matchmaking system we see that persists even to today, but overall an enjoyable experience no less. Zombies in Black Ops Cold War came back with a heavy investment into the main mode while also experimenting with a bit more. Despite the seeming disinterest in zombies from Activision, there was a solid offering that Cold War introduced, but in a way that was meant to be more appealing to everyone. Hot off the heels of Warzone's massive success and many more people checking out the premium titles upgrading from the free-to-play version, Zombies was made much more accessible with things like ammo boxes that you could top off at any time. You had things like notifications for where to go to turn on the power. You had things like loadout weapons where you could spawn in with anything you wanted rather than just the pistol. For some, it wasn't quite Zombies. For others, it was a leisurely yet fun experience still. Black Ops Cold War introduced the Dark Ether storyline, a new storyline independent of the Chaos story that was set up in Black Ops 4, but it drew off the parallels from the original one, with a corrupted universe after everything was plunged into the Dark Ether as of Tag der Toten, with Richtofen ultimately being the director, but setting up a universe that we'd continue to see through Vanguard Zombies as a prequel, Modern Warfare Zombies as a sequel, and then Black Ops 6 as a direct continuation of the Cold War narrative, still on the way. Black Ops Cold War had less Zombies maps than any other game previously of the named Black Ops titles, only including Die Maschine, Firebase C, Mauer der Toten, and Forsaken, simply because of the inclusion of Outbreak, an experimental open-world Zombies mode that again was to utilize the world of the cancelled Blackout 2 map. This saw players going to areas like Alpine, Duga, Golova, Ruka, Sanatorium, Zoo, Collateral, and Armada, where upgrades and rounds are progressively different, but more at the player's own pace. For many, this was a cool addition, but it was also a deviation that didn't quite get the praise that other more classic experiences were afforded, unfortunately. But it was certainly a swing for the fences. Whether or not it was a miss or a home run is entirely subjective. And that brings us to today. Black Ops 6, while not out just yet, we still can talk about the coming experience as it's already been fully revealed, with hands-on having been available for multiplayer and for some, even the Zombies mode for a first time early ahead of its release. Campaign, while we don't have playable gameplay yet, we have seen a mission released that showcased a bit of the elements of what Raven, yes, Raven again for campaign, was going for with this game. Similar to the mission Desperate Measures from Black Ops Cold War, where the objectives ultimately led to the same place in the progression, the steps you take along the way though are entirely up to the player. That type of gameplay is going to be coming back with Black Ops 6, creating an open world type of approach, but not quite as open as the open combat missions that were essentially just reskinned Spec Ops missions that we saw in Modern Warfare 3 this past year. This mission showcased for the campaign is the same way as, again, that Desperate Measures mission from Black Ops Cold War, offering more freedom to the player and building off that notion of that mission from Cold War, where it's not just exactly A to B. The campaign will focus around a few key players from prior Black Ops titles mixed with new players. Characters like Adler and Woods return. While this game solidifies the canon ending that Hudson and Mason are now dead from the flashbacks, or so they seem, from Black Ops 2's campaign, Woods is seriously injured from having his knees blown open with a shotgun by Menendez, which puts him out of commission and essentially gives him an eyes-in-the-sky position. Park also returns, solidifying her canon ending that she survived and Lazar died in the mission End of the Line from the Black Ops Cold War campaign. And then there's new characters like Jane Harrow and Troy Marshall, the protege of Woods, and more are introduced. Adler and company are on the run, where you don't have Uncle Sam to rely on in the upcoming campaign, but while also on the run from the full weight of the US government, you're also trying to figure out who this shadow group of the Pantheon are and why they're hunting you down. Multiplayer looks to introduce a lot of innovations, the key of which though is Omni Movement, which we saw on full display all throughout the multiplayer beta. Technically speaking, it's something that allows for more movement than ever before. We've also seen hitbox location totals being increased, making for custom animations for characters to feel more alive. The classic prestige system will be returning once again, with that race to level 1000 being available, with more and more rewards along the way. The first time that we'll see traditional prestige introduced in a Call of Duty title since 2018 and Black Ops 4. A very welcome return for many players, and it's not seasonal in any capacity. Like, yeah, we had seasonal prestiges from Modern Warfare 2018 onward, but you don't have to wait for more seasons to add more levels as you go along. You could get, in theory, level 1000 before Season 1 even kicks off, and then you're done with the leveling for the entirety of the year. That's entirely up to you. The game has already confirmed that we'll have 16 maps on launch, 12 that are strictly 6v6 maps, and 4 that are strike maps that support both 6v6 and 2v2 compatible play. Nuketown as well will be launching a week after the game's full launch, shortly before the Season 1 update, smack dab in the middle of that. Weaponry, while we don't have a full list as of recording this video, perhaps shortly after it goes live, we will see more of that, but we do know for a fact that 12 weapons are a franchise first introduction with Black Ops 6, meaning that 12 of these weapons coming in the upcoming title have never been seen before in any Call of Duty title prior. The pace and gameplay mechanics look to really make this a high-flying experience. Things like Dark Matter return and the camo grind there, along with a ton of other awesome introductions that I'm personally looking forward to. And then zombies, with what little we have seen, we still know a decent bit. We're going to be seeing 2 maps on launch, Terminus and Liberty Falls. Terminus being the larger scale, darker and more mysterious of the maps, picking up rescuing your strike team from Black Ops Cold War from the island that they were imprisoned on, while Liberty Falls, despite being adjusted since its COD Next reveal, will be the more leisurely played map. Perhaps this map is made more for casual play to just simply grind camos and challenges. We don't know, but we'll have 2 maps at launch, Easter eggs and all, with a 3rd map, the first of the post-launch DLC season, coming by the end of 2024. So before the year ends, we are going to see another 3rd map introduced for players to experience. I'm very much so looking forward to seeing what's in store both map and narrative-wise. I'm really looking forward to having that traditional zombies experience for the first time since Black Ops Cold War as well. While I can appreciate the attempt at something new with open world zombies and Modern Warfare zombies and the scraped together mode that was Vanguard zombies to give us some kind of a 3rd mode, neither really scratched that itch that traditional round-based zombies can do. So the game itself looks to offer a wide range of experiences across campaign, multiplayer, and zombies. Plus you have things like 100% are returning, Dark Ops challenges returning, more unlocks and challenges for customization items returning like reticles, rewards, seasonal events, all that kind of stuff to make the player's time more worthwhile, and much more. So while Black Ops 6 is right around the corner and there's still so much we don't know, we do have a relative understanding of how this progresses the Black Ops franchise and propels the next chapter forward. So for now, that is the complete evolution of Black Ops, a franchise that has such a storied history that has held a special place for so many of us. Maybe we grew up with it, maybe it's something we just got into recently, but doesn't matter. The history is absolutely there. So with Black Ops 6 being the next installment into the franchise, it's a legacy cemented, but not yet finished. For now, that's what we're going to call it, so do let me know your thoughts down below. What was your favorite moment in Black Ops history? If you made it this far, for one, you're an absolute legend. This is by far the longest and most in-depth video we've ever done here on the channel, so truly thank you for watching. But if you made it this far, comment like a secret code phrase down below. Let's go with "the spaghetti sure was good." Let's throw some people off. Comment that if you made it this far. But anyways, if you made it this far, if you'd be so kind, drop a like on this video if you enjoyed the deep dive into the history of Black Ops, and do make sure to subscribe for more Black Ops 6 coverage ahead of the launch and beyond. I'm really stoked to get going here at the launch, and as we chase down that incredibly lofty goal of 600,000 subscribers, I would truly love to have you in the community. But for now, though, thank you so much for watching. My name's Espresso. I'll see you later. Take care, and peace.